Well, welcome everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are in our beautiful country. Welcome to CWWA's National Water and Wastewater Conference. This is the replacement of what we were supposed to be doing in Niagara Falls last November. But of course, with this pandemic, we've gone virtual, and we selected a theme called Towards a Sustainable Utility. It's exciting. This started with our utility leadership committee that wanted to put together a guidance document that will help all of our members move towards that concept of being a sustainable utility. So each of our technical committees took one aspect of this, and they're moving it forward and trying to present that part of it. We're gonna release this document on World Water Day on March 22nd, along with a closing panel for this whole webinar series. So while we have been talking about closing this up on February 24th, we're giving ourselves an extra month, gonna go on World Water Day, and we'll have a discussion about how all these parts come together. All the webinars that we've discussed from water and wastewater and biosolids and energy, and how a senior manager is supposed to balance all those aspects together. Hopefully, we're all back together again next November, November 2021. We are set to meet in Niagara Falls, and oh, how I'd love to see everybody again. It'd be great to get together and see you then. We're going to try something in June with our window on Ottawa. We are scheduled to be live in Ottawa, but we'll see how this pandemic plays out. Either way, that will be broadcast. We'll be doing a hybrid version of the window in June. But oh, I really hope that we can get together again in November. So today, we're going to talk biosolids. And I'm really interested in this topic. I came into this from years in municipal government as a chief administrative officer and clerk, and did a lot of legal. But I'm a geographer, so I'm not an engineer and I'm not a scientist. But one of the few areas that I really did work in municipal government was, besides drainage and beaver management, I worked on biosolids programs within the city of Ottawa with the greater region of Ottawa-Carleton, trying to find sites for biosolids spreading and so on. So one of the areas where I actually have personal experience and interest in, although I've been loving every aspect of our wide water and wastewater sector. Now, of course, we can't do such an event without our sponsors. I thank all of you who are our members and are continuing your support for CWWA, and in particular, one member today, Tetra Tech. Tetra Tech is an international global environmental engineering firm and consulting group. They have 450 locations around the world, almost 50 sites right here in Canada, headquartered mostly in Canada, in Montreal. Tetra Tech not only has been a great member for many years, and they gave us Diana Tao, that's a powerhouse who served on our board for many years and as our president. They were a key sponsor for our conference in Montreal. If any of you remember that party we had in Montreal, well, if you were there, you'll never forget it. We hope we can do that again in November. Oh, I wish we could get together and have parties like that. But I thank Tetra Tech and their continued support for us. Speaking to us today from Tetra Tech, our sponsor, is Stephen Davidson. Stephen is the general manager of Tetra Tech for the environment portfolio. He covers Eastern Canada from the Montreal office. With degrees from the University de Sherbrooke and École Polytechnique de Montréal, he has more than 35 years of experience working for various consulting firms. He specializes in the field of the environment in terms of sustainable development, and as such, he's had the opportunity to work on many projects for the management of organic materials, climate change, renewable energies, and more particularly biomethane and its recovery. Stephen's an active member of several associations, including SWANA, who's involved with us here at CWA, and the Canadian Biogas Association. So welcome, Stephen.
Thanks a lot for your introduction. So today, well, first, Tetra Tech is really proud to sponsor this session today, and I will talk about a sub-product of the Biosolid. So I think that it's worth it to have a brief look on the possibility with Biosolid, and I'm talking about biogas coming from the Biosolid. So before getting into the main subject, I'll briefly, for Tetra Tech, thanks for the introduction. Tetra Tech, as you said, is a worldwide company. We are number one in solid waste and water sector, following the ENR ranking, engineering use record. So this is this is how we operate today in 2021. In Canada, what we do, mainly related to this biosolids session, we are ISO 14065 accredited as a greenhouse gases verifier, and also working in the solid waste and biogas, renewable natural gas, biosolid management. In the waste and biosolid management specifically, we as Tetra Tech, as office and expert all across Canada, working in solid waste, but also in biosolid management, AD and composting facility, and all the issues also coming from these projects, such as odor control, air dispersion modeling, and environmental compliance verification. Now I'd like this slide. I would like to talk to you about the possibility with Biosolid. Of course, this is I think a relevant concept. If you do have a collection of your food waste, you can, if you have a high content of carbon, mix your biosolids with your food waste into an 80 facility, produce biogas, and if it happens, you have a landfill in your on your installation, in your area, you can mix the biogas coming from the landfill into your biogas exiting the 80 facility. But of course, this is optional. But after that, you take the biogas and you can purify that biogas to either, inject it into the grid, or to fuel your fleet, your vehicles. So this is a concept, I think, that could be interesting for your local community. If you decide not to connect to the grid for any reason, because the grid is too far away, it's not, you want to keep the biomethane locally, you still can use a very nice technology from Tetra Tech. You can Google BioCNG on Google, but in the summary, it's a module that you can purify gas coming from your 80 or landfill, and you can treat the gas and fuel all your fleet, so trucks, municipal vehicles. So this is something that can be done locally and easily. Here on this slide at the left, you have some pictures showing the BioCNG installation. So it's like a usual pumping station, but with natural RNG, renewable natural gas. So why replacing fuel by RNG? Of course, to be able to reach the goal of Canada for 2050 being carbon neutral, and now it is happening now. Gas suppliers are actually working hard to replace fossil fuel in their grid by RNG. They fix some goal for the next decade, and some of them are paying also an extra for your gas, up to $25 per gigajoule. So that can be interesting, and of course bringing a new source of revenue. And so you can have subsidies from different level of government for your project, producing RNG from your 80 facility. So thanks a lot for your attention today. So if you have any question related to this subject, please email me. You have my email on the screen. And now I would like to introduce Darren Keem. Darren Keem is a regional manager and senior soil scientist for WSP Canada with their environmental and geotechnical services in Winnipeg, Manitoba. Darren completed a Master of Science in Environment and Management, evaluating the suitability of lagoon wastewater irrigation in the Interlake region of Manitoba. He has over 22 years of experience in agriculture and environmental management consulting. As a professional agrologist, he provides agri-environmental advisory services for the land application of biosolids in Manitoba, providing guidance to municipal clients for the sustainable and beneficial reuse of nutrient for cooperating farm producers. So, Darren, it's your turn.
Thank you, Stephen, and thank you to Tetra Tech for your sponsorship here today in this webinar. The theme for today's webinar is the future of biosolids regulation in Canada.
Darren, sorry, I'm going to cut in on you for a sec. Can we just confirm that most of our guests are now in? I've been noticing a lot of issues in the chat of anyone not being able to fully hear what we're doing yet. And so I know we've asked if you can hear me now. I've been able to hear throughout, but as a presenter, are most guests now being able to hear? I'm hearing yes, 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 yes. Good. Anyone else? I guess I can't tell you. Read the chat. Thanks, Darren. I'll let you get going again.
Not a problem. Thank you very much, Robert. Sorry. So the theme here today is the future of biosolids regulation in Canada. And it has long been recognized that municipal biosolids can be beneficially managed in a sustainable manner in nearly all our municipal jurisdictions across Canada and practically North America, with many policies requiring that these materials should be sustainably applied to agricultural land as they contain valuable nutrients and organic matter for healthy crops. The two presentations today are to expand on the growing understanding of emerging risks of biosolids and recently developed and applied federal regulations for fertilizer use. And our panelists are also here today to expand on their jurisdiction and the guiding principles they use in for applications and management of biosolids. As the speakers go through their presentations, please record your questions in the question Q&A panel up on the right side. It will be important for this as we're going to present these questions at the end through the panelist discussion for everyone to observe the results and engage with the panel group. If we don't get to your panel questions, our apologies at this time. I'd also like to note that there is going to be a poll question released at each of the presentations where you can select the answer that best fits your opinion. We'll share those results also during the proceedings. At this time, I would like to thank the CWWA Biosolids Committee for their engagement here. And these folks are Dominic Selmayer Rapin of the region of Waterloo, Ontario, Sophie St. Louis of Verdis in Quebec, and Karu Yamajima, who is our chairperson, also from the region of Waterloo. Our first presentation here today is Biosolids Management in the Age of Emerging Pathogens, PFAS, and Microplastics. What is next? By Dr. Banu Omechi. Dr. Omechi received her master's and PhD degrees from Duke University. She is the Jarlowski Chair in Water and Global Health, Canada Research Professor in Wastewater Treatment Engineering, and a Director of Global Water Institute at Carleton University. She leads an internationally recognized research program on wastewater and biosolids treatment and has several patents. Dr. Omechi serves on the International Water Association Strategic Council, the Sludge Management Specialist Group, and the Water Environment Association of Ontario Residuals and Biosolids Committee. She is also the recipient of several research, teaching, and mentoring awards. I'll now hand it over to Dr. Umechi.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for attending this webinar. So what I'm going to do today is to provide a quick overview of emerging pollutants in sludge, which may impact the biosolids treatment and management in the future. And also give you some examples from closely work with the International Water Association. So, there's lots to learn from other countries as well. All right, so very quickly going over the global picture, the cost of biosolids treatment and disposal continues to increase. There's more sludge. There are very limited options for land disposal. For disposal of biosolids, land application and thermal treatment are really the main options. Landfilling was disappearing, but now it is coming back after the PFAS issue. So that is interesting to watch. But overall, it's getting very complex to deal with biosolids treatment and management, and especially at the local level, this can even be more complex because of the variations in, public opposition and local bans and other local issues. Okay, so I'm not going to go over in detail over the opportunities in biosolids, but obviously it's a renewable source of nutrients, energy, organic matter, biomaterials, water. And circular economy is very important. We talk about circular economy, and this is really in support of land application of biosolids. This is the only method, land application is the only method that puts the carbon back in soil. But there are other concerns. So there are also concerns from emerging pollutants, such as emerging contaminants, emerging pathogens, antibiotic resistance, nanoparticles, microplastics, and heavy metals. And I'm just going to go over these rather quickly. Okay, pathogens in sludge is an issue. There's a wide range of pathogens, bacteria, viruses, protozoa, helminthova. SARS-CoV-2 is the latest one. Public hears that it is in wastewater, it is in sludge, so there are concerns about this. There are two issues that I would like to highlight. And the first one is the limitations of using indicator bacteria. We use E. coli to assess the safety of wastewater or biosolids treatment. And this is just a quick reminder that E. coli is one of the easiest bacteria to kill, and it's much easier to inactivate compared to viruses, protozoa, and other microorganisms. And also, we have another limitation with the conventional detection methods. So these are basically the culture-based methods like the Petri dish counting colonies. And these methods are not able to capture the viable but non-culturable bacteria. So these are the bacteria that are stressed, which you would expect, for example, after mesophilic anaerobic digestion. Okay, so this is just to show that these results are from our research group. So the first figure you see here, this is like cultured detection methods, such as the Petri dish number of colonies, counting the number of colonies. And after a disinfection process, this is for chlorine disinfection of wastewater, but it does show the point. We can see a very good reduction, 7-log reduction. But if we use molecular methods and actually look at, okay, what percentage of these bacteria are truly dead and what percentage are simply stressed or injured, maybe we get like 1.5 log kill. Okay, so this is something to remember, that we overestimate our inactivation efficiency in treatment processes. Now, this is not difficult to deal with. Why is that? We can simply increase the temperature to time, we can increase the pH, and we would be able to treat these pathogens. But this is definitely something to keep in mind. The other issue now that's coming up a lot is the antibiotic resistance. Okay, so wastewater treatment plants, particularly biological treatment, we provide the ideal conditions for bacteria to grow. Okay, obviously, there is a very wide range of microorganisms, and there are also antibiotic chemicals that exist in very low concentrations. But it is well known that antibiotic resistant genes exist in wastewater, antibiotic resistant bacteria exist in wastewater. And the concern here is if we put all of these microorganisms together, provide the ideal conditions, there might be gene transfer between different bacteria. And that creates the opportunity maybe to create these superbugs. Okay. Now, this has been a concern. There's a lot of research happening in this area. My group also works on this. And this is just to show you an example of the magnitude of this. So what you see here is 98 E. coli, indigenous E. coli, cultured from wastewater. Okay, and if we look at these E. coli, we find that 45% of that have some level of resistance to antibiotics. A small percentage, like 2%, in fact, are resistant to 6 different antibiotics, including the very strong ones. Okay, so this is something to keep in mind, and there's a lot of research happening on the inactivation of these antibiotic resistance bacteria and trying to find out if they are more resistant to treatment processes. A recent research study, this is from Sweden, and Sweden in Europe has been the really leading country in land application of biosolids. Okay, so they have a site which they are operating for since 1981, and so they did some tests to see if long-term application, and long-term here is not just a few years, but it is since 1981, if that causes any accumulation of antibiotics or antibiotic-resistant bacteria in soil. And what they found is there was no significant increase in the concentration of antibiotics, antibiotic-resistant genes, antibiotic-resistant bacteria, and there was a subtle change in the microbial community composition. Okay, now coming back to SARS-CoV-2, so this is the virus that causes COVID-19. And right now, because of all the wastewater-based epidemiology studies, which is in the news, which is covered a lot, people hear about this. So COVID-19 virus is in wastewater. Is it going to make me sick? Just a quick note here that this is not really a concern for wastewater or sludge treatment. The reason is SARS-CoV-2 is an envelope virus, and compared to other water pathogens that we are more familiar with, that we deal with in wastewater treatment, SARS-CoV-2 is the easiest microorganism to kill compared to the other bacteria or viruses or protozoa in wastewater. So this is not really a concern. Wrapping this up, a little bit more information. Until now, no infectious, and infectious is the key word here. The virus can be present in wastewater, but it doesn't mean it is infectious. So until now, no infectious virus has been found in wastewater, sludge, or biosolids. And detecting the genetic material of the virus doesn't mean that there is infectious virus in wastewater. And it is SARS-CoV-2 is much easier to inactivate compared to other water pathogens. Okay. The other example is nanoparticles. So nanoparticles are also gaining a lot of attention, and we also work with nanoparticles in my research group. So we carried out a research study a couple of years ago, and this was recently published. And what is different here is the concentration of the nanoparticles are relevant concentrations, environmentally relevant concentrations. They're not huge. But the other thing we did is we spiked the nanoparticles before anaerobic digestion, and then land applied the biosolids. And this is all lab scale testing. And we monitored what happens in soil for 3.5 months. Okay. So what we found was some impact on the bacterial diversity, heterotrophic bacteria, percentage of live cells, but it was also clearly visible that over time the difference between the control reactor, which didn't have any nanoparticles, and the reactors with nanoparticles was getting smaller and smaller. So it was an indication that long term, maybe after a year or after 6 months, that the toxicity of these nanoparticles would be getting less and less. And the reason for that is because nanoparticles react with lots of different things and they go through transformation in soil. Okay. So this is a new one, microplastics. This is not getting enough attention in North America. And I keep saying this is going to be a big issue. This is going to get more attention in the near future. So just be ready. Okay. Microplastics, they are everywhere. Unfortunately, they are in wastewater too. And the main source is really the laundry. We wear lots of synthetic clothing. So in particular, microplastic fibers and particles. And I lost the slides. Okay, thank you for bringing it back. Okay, so my slides are back again. Thank you. So there are fibers, there are microplastic films, there are microplastic pellets, fragments. So these are all in sludge. Okay. Recent studies have shown that these microplastics exist in relatively high concentrations in sludge. And what is more important is with increasing number of applications, biosolids applications in agricultural soils, the concentration of microplastics in soil, in agricultural soil, increased. Now, this is a concern because microplastics, they do not biodegrade. Nothing happens to them for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. And now this brings up the issue that are we contaminating agricultural soils, virgin soils, with by land application of biosolids because we are putting microplastics on agricultural soils. Similar to this, okay, this is the same study that I mentioned. I'll just quickly skip that. And PFAS is another big one, okay. And in North America, this is a big issue now. We've been hearing about this already for several years. And PFAS, they are very stable chemically and thermally as well. They're very resistant to degradation. They're called forever chemicals. They not only accumulate, they also bioaccumulate, which is different and which is of concern, obviously. And in human blood samples and tissues now, we are measuring increasing concentrations of PFAS. With biosolids application, there's also research that shows that plants take up PFAS, and there is the possibility of humans being exposed to PFAS by consuming the plants. Okay. So because they do not really biodegrade, and there are studies on treatment, and what may happen is sometimes the concentrations may also increase because of the precursors, and they may generate new PFAS during treatment. And we have this very good Canadian study from Wayne Parker and Shirley and Smith from Canada, and they also showed that with, for example, alkaline treatment and pelletization, there was some increase in PFAS concentrations and little bit of decrease with aerobic and anaerobic digestion. Okay, so if we look at the concentrations in biosolids, one of my students put this together, and we already have some limits in Germany and UK, and other countries and regions are also getting ready to introduce limits for the group of chemicals. Okay, but like 100 nanogram per gram, which is like the German limit here, And if we look at the reported PFAS concentrations in biosolids in different countries, like, yeah, some of them are higher, some of them are lower, but there is kind of the range of the PFAS concentrations that we see in biosolids. Okay, so I have 5 more minutes, and what I'm going to focus is on the regulation piece, what is happening in Europe and how this may impact us. Okay, so this figure shows the biosolids disposal options in Europe, what different countries are doing, and so this is like the latest available figure, and the data is from 2017. And the green, what you see green is basically agricultural use or composting. Light pink is incineration, and the darker pink is landfilling. So, I mean, depending on the country, if they're a developing country or not, if they are new members to Europe, I mean, there is obviously a variation in disposal practices. And there are countries like the Netherlands, for example, which is basically pretty much 100% thermal treatment incineration, whereas Germany was doing still quite a bit of land application. You cannot say, okay, let me just highlight here. Here is Germany, and this is Netherlands here. Okay, and then there are also countries that use still landfilling because they do not have other options. But if we look at Western Europe and Northern Europe, so these are the countries, and they can afford the thermal treatment or more expensive treatment processes. I'll give you 2 examples. One is Germany, and the other one is Sweden. So Germany was applying sludge on agricultural fields quite a lot. Okay, so in 2018, now they have a new German sludge ordinance, and it was like a knife. They just almost immediately wanted to stop land application of biosolids, and they have very, very strict rules. Even if it is not impossible to land apply, they practically make it impossible, and they have rules such as reducing the phosphorus content of sludge by 50% through wastewater treatment or sludge treatment, which is very difficult to achieve, and they insist on mono incineration. So incinerators can only be for sludge only, not with combined with biosolids incineration, and it is very difficult. Okay, Sweden has always been the strongest supporter of land application of biosolids. Why is that? Because they are all for circular economy. And if you really focus on the concept of circular economy, it should be the land application of biosolids. So what they were effectively doing is they were recovering phosphorus, but also at the same time phasing out non-biodegradable and bioaccumulative substances. Now, this happened after microplastics, and this is why microplastics may be the next big contaminant. And now they are considering banning land application. And the reason for this is because microplastics, they do not biodegrade, and there is the real potential of accumulation of microplastics in agricultural soils. Having said this, this is again from Sweden. And this is the site that they've been monitoring since 1981. I mean, you can see that the land application of biofields, land application of biosolids benefit the crop yield here. And then the phosphorus content is higher in land applied in agricultural soil treated with biosolids, and there is no significant increase in cadmium content. Okay. So I'll move to the last slide. What does future hold for Canada? Is it going to be agricultural use, or is it going to be incineration? So both has its place, but realistically, incineration will make more sense for larger municipalities, that have the population density. It's very important. We're not Europe. Our population density is very low. And incineration, if it is done well, you can recover energy, you can recover phosphorus, 90% phosphorus recovery from ash. With the PFAS issue, we already see this in the US now. The cost of disposal is increasing by 40%. The reason is now people have to switch back to landfilling because land application is not possible anymore. Okay. So this can potentially be done for larger communities where the population density exists, and like around Toronto, why not? Okay. But for smaller communities, we have to protect the agricultural use and land application. And the way to do that is we have to ban the use of these or commercial use of these very resistant organic contaminants and have a better control on the source of these contaminants. This is environmental pollution. It's not just sludge or wastewater, but source control is very important. And also for resource recovery, circular economy, all of those, there are lots of more opportunities in smaller communities, in medium-sized communities, and we have to focus on both land application and thermal treatment, not one or the other, and both options have to be protected. Thank you.
Thank you so much there, Manu. That was an excellent presentation. Certainly gave me a lot of insight to our land application programs. As noted, we'll address audience questions through the panel discussion, so please document your questions through the Q&A chat on the side. Also this time, we're going to be opening the poll for our first presenter here, so please provide your selection on the screen there for the opinions. While we're doing that, we'll now move also and introduce our next presentation, which is Regulation of Municipal Biosolids in Canada and Changes to Fertilizer Regulations. Our presenter here is Eva Mandy of the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, the Fertilizer Safety Section. Eva Mandy is the National Manager for Fertilizer Safety at the CFIA. She has been managing the fertilizer program for over 10 years, and Eva has received her PhD in plant physiology from the University of Waterloo, and this field of study has always been her passion. She lives in Ottawa, Ontario, with her 2 great dogs.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Eva Mandy, and I'm the National Manager of the Fertilizer Safety Section of the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. You're listening to the presentation on video, unfortunately, because the CFIA does not support the platform of the meeting. Nevertheless, I would like to thank the organizers for inviting us to present the federal perspective on regulation of biosolids in Canada, particularly in the light of the new amendments that came into force October 26, 2020. So in terms of background, let's take a quick look at the types of products and sectors that are regulated by the CFIA under the Fertilizers Act. More specifically, we deal with fertilizers and supplements. The definition of those 2 product categories are included in the Act, and fertilizer predominantly containing nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, or other essential plant food, is regulated when manufactured, sold, or represented for use as a plant nutrient. Supplement is another category of products which is much broader and covers quite a wide range and array of different agriculture inputs. The definition of a supplement includes any substance or mixture of substances other than a fertilizer that is manufactured, sold, or represented for use in the improvement of the physical condition of the soil or to aid plant growth and crop yield. So what kind of products do we regulate? Well, obviously, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium fertilizers, micronutrients, fertilizer-pesticide combinations which are regulated jointly by the CFIA and the PMRA, so Pest Management Regulatory Agency, different types of chemical supplements, microbial supplements including viable bacteria or fungi, as well as a wide range of waste-derived materials, including compost, digestates, and obviously the topic of this presentation, municipal biosolids. All regulated fertilizer and supplements must be safe for human, plants, animals, and the environment. This is a very broad mandate, but it is a fundamental and integral part and objective of the fertilizer regulations. In that respect, we actually administer a very broad risk management model, starting from Fargate to dinner. This slide really represents the different risk pathways that we are mitigating as part of our fertilizer program at the CFIA. So the obvious one are the direct effects on workers, handlers, applicators, and bystanders. The other element are indirect effects, including feed and food safety, grazing land, and with respect to food crop production or the food production continuum, we are looking at adsorption, so surface of the plants, as well as absorption through the root system and plant uptake into the edible portions of the plant. In addition to that, our mandate covers environmental safety and sustainability, including soil, groundwater, and waterway contamination, which obviously during the current preoccupation with climate change is essential to our mandate as well. The type of contaminants or the type of risks that we manage include potential chemical contaminants like heavy metals, chlorinated organics, endocrine disruptors, pharmaceutical residues, as well as potential microbial contaminants, pathogens, allergens, as well as different type of bacterial and fungal toxins. Safety standards. The CFIA administered safety standards for metals, dioxins, and furans, and indicator organisms. What is important to point out is that these numerical criteria or thresholds are not prescribed in the fertilizer regulations themselves. Rather, they are housed in guidance documents as well as administrative policy documents, which allows us to update them from time to time as new science comes to light. With respect to trace metals, the CFIA monitors arsenic, cadmium, chromium, cobalt, copper, mercury, molybdenum, nickel, lead, selenium, and zinc. Now, the CFIA metal standards are slightly different than those implemented and monitored by the provincial departments. And that is, they are based on 45-year cumulative application to soil. As a result, the actual standard is a factor of the concentration of the metal in the product, as well as its rate of application. This particular approach is essential in mitigating long-term or chronic impacts of soil accumulation of trace metals. Similar approach is taken with dioxins and furans. Those standards are based over 45 years application and are based on toxic equivalency quotient. Finally, indicator organisms that the CFIA uses are really indicators of the effectiveness of the processing of a given material. The two indicator organisms that CFIA currently uses is Salmonella and fecal coliform. Again, it's fecal coliform, no, not E. coli. Those particular organisms are also commonly used as indicators in other jurisdictions, US and the EU as well. The permissible levels are non-detectable for Salmonella and 1,000 most probable number for fecal coliforms. Now, moving on to the more excited part of the presentation and our conversation today are the amendments to the fertilizer regulations. As I indicated, the modernized fertilizer regulations came into force on October 26, 2020. And in the links below, you can actually find the text of the consolidated regulations, both former and current. The amendments to the regulations were actually quite significant, and they introduced a number of substantive changes to product definitions and compositional criteria of various materials, general exemptions from the provisions of the Act and regulations, a completely brand new registration exemption scheme, which is very important for those industry members that register products on a regular basis with the CFIA, as well as labeling requirements, including bilingual labeling and administrative processes. The latter two were really amended with the view to reduce regulatory and administrative burden on regulated parties. The regulations also contain a transitional provision that allows regulated parties to comply with either the old or the new regulations for a period of 3 years. In effect, on October 26, 2023, the old regulations will become obsolete and no longer in force, and all fertilizers and supplements in the Canadian marketplace will have to comply with the requirements of the new regulations. What is important, and we've been emphasizing it for various industry members, is that solid understanding of both sets of regulations is critical because it will facilitate their choice and ultimately promote compliance in the marketplace, particularly within the 3-year transition period. Now, definitions and associated exemptions. The exemption scheme is really rooted in the definitions that are prescribed in the fertilizer regulations. Some of them were repealed, mostly as house cleaning items. However, the one significant one is a repealing of the compendium of fertilizer use pesticides, and also removal of any distinction between farm fertilizer and specialty fertilizer. Some of you may be aware that a number of different specialty fertilizers used to be exempt from registration, even though the risk profile was identical to those products used on farm. That particular distinction was rooted in historical efficacy considerations and have been since removed. We've also amended and repealed and replaced some definitions for more clarity or to ensure alignment with the current science terminology. What we also did is added a number of different definitions, most prominently the list of materials. So the document entitled Primary Fertilizer and Supplement Materials replaces the old or former Schedule 2, for those of you that are familiar with it, which is a listing of materials that are exempt from registration and pre-market assessment. That list of materials is incorporated by reference. That ambulatory incorporation by reference allows the agency to actually amend the list from time to time on a periodic basis without going through the lengthy process of regulatory change. We've also added the definition of a lot number, micronutrient, and micronutrient fertilizer. So, what type of fertilizers are exempt from registration? Well, first of all, those that appear on the primary fertilizer and supplement material list. As I indicated, the list replaces old Schedule 2 and it's incorporated by reference. Two very important criteria are applied in order for a material to meet the exemption from registration and listing on the list of materials. That is, the primary material on the list must meet the term and compositional criteria or definition as prescribed on the list, and the products that are represented to be or contain a material from the list must in fact contain the material. Continuing on, mixed fertilizers that do not contain substances that are produced by or derived from living organisms is another exemption. This particular wording replaces the concept of mineral-derived fertilizers, which existed in the former regulations. Also, fertilizers that consist solely of a mixture of fertilizers that are either exempt from registration or that are registered for that use are also exempt. This is a very brand new addition to the fertilizer regulations and provide a greater flexibility for the regulated parties to mix materials of low risk together and sell them as a different product type. But more on that a little bit later. So what is not exempt from registration are fertilizers produced or derived from living organisms, as well as fertilizers that contain a pesticide, an unregistered supplement, an unregistered micronutrient, or a registered supplement or micronutrient if the directions for use are not consistent with the registered product's approval use pattern. So what do we mean by that is that if the individual ingredients are either registered or exempt, they can be mixed, and the mixture will be exempt only if the approved use pattern, which is application rate, frequency, method of application, and target crop, are consistent with that intended use of the final mixture. Now moving on to biosolids, which obviously are of greater interest to this audience. In general, as I indicated, manufacture, use, and disposal of biosolids is regulated by our provincial and municipal colleagues present here. Municipal biosolids represented as sources of recycled plant nutrients do meet the definition of a fertilizer, and when imported or sold in Canada are regulated under the Fertilizers Act by the CFIA. All municipal biosolids must meet at minimum CFIA safety standards, those that I already mentioned for trace metals, pathogen indicators, dioxin and furans, and pesticides. These safety standards have not changed when the regulations were amended. As some of you also know, the CFIA since 2012 does not regulate product efficacy, so performance claims, benefit claims, and testing for minimum nutrient content is no longer part of our marketplace monitoring activities. However, as any other product regulated under the Fertilizers Act, municipal biosolids, even if exempt from registration, are subject to marketplace monitoring and compliance verification, and non-compliant products are subject to enforcement action, such as detention or seizure, or ordering of unlawful imports out of the country, or in cases of severe or repeated violations, prosecution. Continuing with general exemptions from the Fertilizers Act and regulations. Manures that are sold in the natural conditions and meet the safety standards continue to be exempt. Fertilizers and supplements, either imported or manufactured in Canada, that are used for manufacturing purposes and require further treatment are also exempt from all provisions of the Act and regulations. Mind you, please note that mixing, blending, repackaging, or application to seed do not constitute manufacturing or further treatment. Furthermore, fertilizers and supplements that are manufactured domestically or imported for export only and not for sale in Canada are exempt from all provisions of the Act and regulations if they are labeled accordingly. Now, these products are still eligible for export certification. However, export certification is not a requirement to export fertilizers and supplements. They are available on request, and the only thing that the export certification attests to is that the product met the Canadian regulatory requirements. It is silent on the importing country requirements. In addition, we have repealed the exemption for fertilizers imported for personal use to ensure level playing field between importers and domestic manufacturers. Now, there is still a provision that allows an unregistered fertilizer to be tested in field trials if it doesn't contain a pesticide or a supplement, if it is safe for humans and plants, animals, and the environment, and the residual product and the crops grown with the fertilizer are disposed of safely at the end of the trial and do not enter the commercial food or feed chains. Continue and adding a little bit into the exemption from registration. List of primary fertilizer and supplement materials, as we mentioned already, is exempt from registration and pre-market assessment. Municipal biosolids, which is indicated in the red box on the right, continue to be exempt from registration as long as they meet the compositional criteria prescribed on the list. So, it is solid, semi-solid, or liquid material comprised of septic or municipal sewage sludge, or both, freed from grit and coarse solids which have been subjected to physical, chemical, or biological treatment, or a combination of these treatments, sufficient to mitigate against the presence and effect of generally detrimental or seriously injurious substances that may be associated with untreated forms of this material. In order for a municipal biosolid to be exempt from registration, it has to meet that particular definition. As I also indicated, the new development or the new addition to the fertilizers regulations is the exemption for mixtures of fertilizers and supplements or both, as long as the components are either exempt or registered and the use pattern on the approved product label is consistent with intended use of the final mixture. Now, the exemption for mixtures, and I really want to strongly emphasize that, is a huge improvement and addition to the fertilizer regulations. It was not possible under the former regime, which, as you know, if you took two materials on Schedule 2 and mixed them together, the final mixture was still subject to registration. That is no longer the case. Mixtures are exempt, which offers greater flexibility for regulated parties and definitely expedites time to market. Moving on to labeling. Every person who packages or causes to be packaged a fertilizer or supplement, or who imports a packaged product, must ensure that the package is labeled in accordance with the regulation. Before we move forward, I guess a little bit of an explanation is required to explain the package situation. So a package is actually defined in the Fertilizers Act as sack, bag, barrel, case, or any other container in which fertilizer or supplement are placed or packed. Now, that is an important point to make because it not only includes bagged fertilizers and supplements, but also bulk shipments that are transported in trucks, in rail carts, or even shipments on a boat. So all of these vessels are covered under the definition of a package. Now, a label must not have printed on it any incorrect or misleading information or symbol that will mislead the purchaser as to the identity of the product, whether it is a fertilizer or supplement, its composition, safety, and also important directions for use. All the information required by the regulations must appear on the label in both English and French. That particular edition was specific to ensure compliance with the Official Language Act. The definition of municipal biosolids as it appears on the list also requires a grade. So a grade means the amount of total nitrogen, available phosphoric acid, and soluble potash in a fertilizer expressed in percent. Originally, the proposal called for the macronutrients, so nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, to be guaranteed on actual basis in the product. That was actually published together with the proposal in Canada Gazette Part 1 as part of the regulatory change process, and was met with significant opposition from the regulated parties, from actually all sectors that responded to the consultation period. As a result, we have reverted back to guaranteeing macronutrients on minimum basis. However, we are also in the process of developing upper major nutrient tolerances beyond which the product is going to be considered non-compliant. So if the product guarantees, let's say, 5% nitrogen and in fact contains 55% nitrogen, that would definitely exceed the tolerance. Now, the tolerances are going to be developed in close collaboration with the industry sector and different stakeholders, and I invite you to participate in the process as much as you need to. Now, the upper major nutrient tolerances are a key determinant in terms of environmental sustainability and sound nutrient management, as they directly impact the design of the application rate that meets those two environmental safety objectives. Specifically, in terms of labeling, if the product is a single ingredient material, the term municipal biosolids must appear on the label. And as we indicated before, the composition must meet the definition. If it is a mixture, then the term and other active ingredients need to appear on the label, or alternatively, and this is a brand new addition in the revised or amended regulations, this information must be kept in records that are provided on request by any CFIA official. Now, those records need to contain information that is sufficient to substantiate that the product meets the exemption, and in some cases including registration numbers if applicable. There is specific guidance on record keeping requirements that is available on our website in one of the trade memoranda, and I do encourage you to familiarize yourself with who must keep the record, who can request the record, and how long the records need to be maintained for. Now, in terms of labeling with specific emphasis on safety, as I indicated, the fertilizer regulations are very much outcome based. So they prescribe the ultimate goal or outcome. However, the specific means by which that outcome is achieved is not actually stipulated in the regulatory text. Very similar approach is taken with precautionary statements. So any precautionary statement that is necessary to mitigate a risk of harm to human, animal, or plant health or the environment can be required to appear on the label. The text really depends on the fertilizer safety section and the regulated parties or the product proponent. As long as the objective is achieved, the wording can vary. Now, an interesting point that I do want to turn your attention to is that the new regulations indicate that any person can request, so a purchaser or a user or a customer can request a document in English or in French that lists the ingredients that are contained in a fertilizer or supplement that present a risk of harm to the health of any human or animal, in case those ingredients don't appear on the label. And that particular document has to be, or listing of potentially harmful ingredients, have to be provided by the person who packaged the product or caused it to be packaged, or the person who imported it. Why is this new provision instituted? Mostly it is intended to protect consumers that are immunocompromised, hypersensitive, allergic, or in any other way more sensitive to exposure risks that would result in adverse health reaction. Precautionary statements to a large extent depend on the nature of the active ingredient and its inherent hazard. So different precautionary statements will be required on viable organism labels versus supplemental metals. There are also specific precautionary statements that are required for a given metal, such as boron. The one thing that I want to turn your attention to, which is obviously of great interest, is allergenicity statements. As you know, Health Canada has identified priority allergens such as peanuts, tree nuts, sesame seeds, milk, eggs, fish, crustaceans, and mollusks, soy, wheat, and triticale, sulfites, and mustard. And in some cases, those allergenicity statements need to appear on products that are highly homogeneous in nature and may contain some of the allergic proteins in them. In addition to that, and most of you are aware of that, prohibited materials, so proteins derived from any mammal, also require very specific precautionary statements that are prescribed and mandated by the Health of Animals regulations. Precautionary statements in general is one of the preventative risk mitigation measure which is used by the Fertilizer Safety Section and other jurisdictions around the world, together with safe handling, disposal measures, use pattern restrictions such as do not use on food crops, for example, or grazing land. All of those elements, really their objective is to create a risk mitigation environment where people are not exposed to harm associated with a given ingredient. This really brings me to the end of my presentation. I do really encourage you very strongly to take a look at the information that is available on the fertilizers website, which was very much reformed and amended and modernized in accordance with the new regulations. There's a specific section on the website that deals with fertilizer program regulatory modernization, including current information, how to meet the requirements during the transition period, as well as highlighting the specific changes to the program administration as a result of the amendments. All of the trade memoranda that contain specific product-specific standards and requirements have been updated and are available on the same website. We have also, and those are available on request, we also have presentation video recordings and from a variety of different forums, including the Canadian Fertilizer Products Forum, the Fertilizer and Supplement Advisory Committee, presentations, as well as webinars that we have conducted on issue-specific topics just recently this month. I thank you very much for your attention, and I am a little bit over time, and I welcome any questions that you might have. Thank you.
At this time, thank you very much, Eva, for your presentation and sharing of your federal fertilizer regulations and the amendments that are coming to it. Again, now we have a poll question that is being presented and will be put on the screen for everyone to express their opinion on it. A little different of a question here to provide some guidance to the Biosolids Committee on that part. We're going to move into our panel discussion now at this time, and we're going to have a bit of an opening statement and then introductions of our panelists in this part. One of our panelists have had to depart early, unfortunately, so we won't have their insight, but we have a great panel regardless. Across Canada, many municipal jurisdictions have established biosolids management plans, each based on the various influences of their specific situations. These influences may include, but not limited to, wastewater treatment infrastructure, service population, stakeholder input, access to alternative methods, funding, and federal, provincial, and municipal regulatory frameworks. The approach to sustainable reuse of biosolids resource is well studied, and as noted by our presenters today, that there are a few concerns that practitioners need to be aware. For our panel discussion today, each of our 4 panelists will provide their jurisdictional approach to sustainable reuse with further commentary on additional measures they perceive may be required in the future to maintain this as a sustainable use option. Our panelists here today, and I'm going to introduce them in order that we'll have them present a small presentation from their perspective, and we'll recircle with any questions then in that order. Our first panelist was to be Tony from the City of Montreal, and unfortunately he has had to depart early. Gordon Dinwoody from Alberta Environment, Parks, Land Policy Branch is here with us today. Gordon is a land reclamation policy specialist and a professional agrologist with the Alberta Environment and Parks. Gordon develops guidelines for soil remediation and land reclamation, as well as guidance for the land application of industrial and municipal wastes. He was a member of the Canadian Council of Ministers of the Environment Compost Guidelines Task Group and Biosolids Task Group, and currently chairs the CCME's Contaminated Sites Working Group. Next, we have Siobhan Berland-Ross with the Manitoba Conservation and Climate Branch. Siobhan is an engineer manager with the Manitoba Conservation and Climate Environmental Approvals Branch. Siobhan mandates includes environmental assessments and licensing process for wastewater treatment facilities, including biosolids, waste processing and disposal facilities, including composting and mines, and industrial developments. She was a member and co-chair of the CCME Municipal Wastewater Effluent Coordinating Committee and a member of the Biosolids Task Group. Next is Benoit Lebeau with the Province of Ontario Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs. Mr. Benoit is a nutrient management engineer with the Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs of Ontario since 2005. He assists farmers, consultants, and engineers in understanding the requirements of the nutrient management regulation in Ontario and reviews nutrient management strategies and plans. Prior to this, Benoit has also worked for various municipalities in Ontario and British Columbia, managing biosolids programs and optimizing wastewater treatment plants. Benoit is a member of the Residual and Biosolids Committee of the Water Environment Association of Ontario and has had the opportunity to be part of the Biosolids Task Group that was established by the CCME. And lastly, but not forgotten here, is Jim McQueer. Jim is one water innovation lead at Tetra Tech, where his role is to support utilities in identifying the best infrastructure investment and management strategies for the 21st century water recovery facilities. Jim has over 20 years in the industry, split evenly between consulting engineering and working in operations at large wastewater treatment utilities. Consistent through his career, however, is his belief that the value to ratepayers and economical recovery of the resource are 2 core tenets of good water infrastructure services. Jim is active in the International Water Association, the Water Research Foundation, and the Water Environment Federation. We'll now turn to each of our speakers' presentations here, starting with Gordon.
Well, thanks, Darren. Here in Alberta, we've been land applying biosolids in agricultural situations for quite a long time. I think our first guidelines came out in about 1981. But we're finding increasing challenges in being able to dispose of as much biosolid as we would like and as landowners would like, largely due to changes in agricultural practices. So it used to be we had a lot of summer fallow and that gave opportunities throughout the growing season for municipalities to land apply. Now with the move to no tillage or minimum tillage, there's very little summer fallow, and the land application window is restricted to more spring and fall. And if you run into some bad weather in those seasons, it can really put a crimp into a municipality's land application plan. So agriculture will continue to be a significant role for the use of our biosolids, but we're starting to look at some other other types of applications. Our two biggest municipalities are Edmonton and Calgary. They've been exploring projects around land reclamation. We're starting to phase out of coal power, so we've got some large coal mines that are going to be moving into a reclamation phase. You've also got aggregate mines that are always looking for material as they try to meet their reclamation requirements. And so the municipalities have also been looking at more of an agroforestry approach. So willow biomass production and generating a woody biomass that has some uses. So we've been working with them on those projects, and we're in the process of revising our guidelines, kind of in the early stages of that, to bring in some of these other land uses, both agroforestry and land reclamation approaches and guidance around that, in addition to our current agricultural program. So that's the direction we're heading for over the next few months, to try and get those guidelines out, and I think that'll set direction for the province over the next few years. So yeah, thanks for that. I think that's our update.
Siobhan, you're up next.
Sure. So in Manitoba, I think similarly to Alberta, we've been land applying biosolids for quite some time. I think our first guidelines came in the early 1980s as well. We do have a lot of land application. I would say it's the most common disposal method in Manitoba. We actually, there are two acts in Manitoba that regulate wastewater and biosolids, and they're actually administered by two different departments now. So we work well together. The Water Protection Act comes up with the standards, the objectives and guidelines, and then under the Environment Act, we issue approvals along with conditions for the land application and the limits and so on. The standards that are in existence right now under the Manitoba Water Quality Standards, Objectives and Guidelines do include the following standard for biosolids: that best practical technology for beneficial use of valuable resources such as nutrients, organic matter, and energy contained within municipal biosolids and sludge. So that standard applies to new and expanding facilities, but we also look at that when we get requests for existing facilities to manage their biosolids. We generally don't allow for disposal in landfills, except where there are really no other options. So some of our really remote northern communities may have small amounts of biosolids that are allowed to be disposed in that way. But land application, as I said, is the most common method. We have more wastewater treatment lagoons than sewage treatment plants in Manitoba. So the difference there would be that the biosolids are looking to be land applied, once every 10 or 20 years, versus a larger community that's going to continuously collect and need to manage those biosolids on an ongoing basis. So they're looking for other options to store or to treat those biosolids and other ways of managing them. Our nutrient management regulation in 2011 did ban winter spreading. So as with Alberta, the spring and fall is typically where that land application is actually happening. We aren't aware of any concerns finding land to accept the biosolids. It's something that's wanted, and we also don't have a lot of public concerns that have been raised or that type of interest in those programs. But likewise, we have a lot of work on new options. We've had quite a few pilots going on that we've approved. We have a process for approving pilot studies, different ways of dealing with biosolids, and some of those include, some biosolids composting type operations, soil fabrication, using, as mine tailings or reclamation sites, and some in situ remediation for those lagoons to treat them kind of on site over the long term. In particular, the City of Winnipeg has a biosolids master plan that incorporates a combination of all of those different options, and they've been successfully doing some pilots. The most recent one, they've completed a successful pilot for soil fabrication, and that's where they're mixing the municipal biosolids, some wood chips as a carbon source, and the street sweepings that they get from the cleaning the streets, and they're producing a cover for a decommissioned landfill. So they're establishing sort of a native prairie landscape on this old landfill and using those different aspects together. So they actually have their proposal to make that a permanent part of their plan is out for public comment right now, actually. So yeah, that's kind of Manitoba's direction. We're certainly interested in continuing to look at sustainable ways of reusing the biosolids.
Thank you very much, Siobhan. Benoit, you're up next.
I'm joining by phone, so can you hear me?
Yes, we have you.
Okay, excellent. So, yeah, sorry, I have, I guess, internet issues here, so I cannot join by video, but or computer, but glad that I can connect by phone. So, yeah, I guess in Ontario, same here, we recognize that spreading biosolids agricultural land returns essential nutrient and organic matter to soil, and that foster growth, plant growth. But I guess with a qualifier that respecting we try to push for the 4R principle, which is the right product at the right time, at the right place, and at the right rate. So with that in mind, I guess the biosolid application to agricultural land really fits the concept of circular economy. It can minimize the greenhouse gas emission and sequester carbon. In Ontario, we produce approximately 300,000 dry ton of municipal biosolid, which is probably around half of what is produced in Canada. 75% of the municipalities apply their biosolid to land, but that adds up to about 40% of the annual production of biosolid in the province. 50% of the production is incinerated, and 10% goes to landfill. That's our, I guess, our estimate at the present time. Since 2011, the application of biosolids to agricultural land is regulated under the Nutrient Management Act, or the NMA. So just in a nutshell, the nutrient management regulation allows for two types of sewage biosolids that would be applied to agricultural land, and those that are regulated under the Fertilizer Act that Eva was just describing here. And the other one are the non-ag source material, or NASM, and they must meet NASM quality under the regulation. So those NASM would be maybe the equivalent of Class B biosolid in other jurisdictions. So the sewage biosolids that are applied to land under as a NASM, they must have an approved NASM plan, which is approved by my ministry, OMAFRA. So just in simple terms, I guess a NASM plan is a prescribed nutrient management plan that aims at demonstrating that the application of NASM and potentially other fertilizers that are applied to the same field do not exceed what the crops or the crop rotation would need. So that's in terms of nitrogen and phosphorus, and whichever is the most limiting factor. And often with the phosphorus removal in the wastewater treatment plant, the phosphorus becomes the limiting factor. And the sewage biosolids that are regulated under the fertilizer regulation do not need a NASM plan, but really they must be, I guess, handled or applied following the label and best management practices. I guess, yeah, the other option, the regulatory framework in Ontario allows for also biosolid to be a feedstock as in a commercial compost, up to 25% on a dry weight basis, and also the options of land application to forestry land or land reclamation is possible under the Environmental Protection Act. So that's, I guess that's what's happening here in Ontario.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Anna. Jim McQuarrie, can we have you come up next, please?
Yeah, sure. Well, I'm honored to be here today. I have to confess, I'm actually from south of the border here in Denver, Colorado, United States. Yeah, for those who may not know, Denver is located at the foothills of the Rocky Mountains, and to the east of Denver is the high desert plains of eastern Colorado and Kansas. And here at Denver, the largest facility that I have worked at over the last 10 years, the process has been to move 80 tons per day of biosolids east, where it is used for dry land wheat farming, cattle range, and where there's water available, it's used for corn crops. I think with the minute that I have here, I'd like to maybe talk about the history of how biosolids were managed here in Denver over the last 50 years, and kind of point out that it actually took this area about 30 years for things to settle down to figure out a sustainable approach with biosolids. So for Denver, when regional wastewater facilities were finally commissioned here, the first technology out of the gate was to incinerate the sludge. And there was a 6-inch natural gas line providing the fuel to incinerate the sludge. And that only lasted for about 4 years, and it got closed down because of the massive amount of air pollution. So that didn't work. So the next step was to lagoon the sludge and accumulate it until a better solution could be figured out. And during that period of time, liquid sludge and eventually low solid sludge was landfilled. But then off migration from the landfill resulted in a lot of litigation issues in association with contamination of groundwater. So that didn't work either. And so then for about 10 years, composting was tried. And after that, 50,000 acres east of Denver was purchased. And finally, the region had a sustainable biosolids program rooted in all the things that have already been discussed with regard to the benefits of biosolids for soil health and nutrients and macronutrients. So with that, the last thing I'll say is, it tends to be one of the largest cost centers for a wastewater utility. And I'll leave it at that for now, Darren, so we have some time for questions.
Well, thank you very much, Jim. Much appreciated. And thank you to all our panelists for joining us here today. If I can have our two presenters also join us on screen, that'd be greatly appreciated. And we can now move into the questions that may be being put on screen. So I have been monitoring here and noticed there are a couple questions being put forward by our guests. And so we'll just put the first one forward. Any information on the presence of macroplastics in soils or microplastics with or without impact on of biosolids, and any risks to plants or groundwater? And I believe that probably would be going to Banu.
Right. So earlier research mostly focused on oceans. Okay, so the focus on terrestrial and freshwater ecosystems is relatively new, but now there is enough information, knowledge that is building, and we do see toxicity effects on the organisms, and like microplastics, depending on how you define it, it can be a huge range from macroplastics to microplastics. But also remember, now we have nanoplastics. Okay, that's new. They are there. It's just more difficult to study and measure. But so they can be transported by water vertically, horizontally. For the smaller microplastics and nanoplastics, there are concerns for plant uptake. But the main concern with microplastics, I mean, yeah, toxicity is also possible because of all the chemicals that are used in microplastics. But the main concern is contaminating soils, whether agricultural soils or forest or as a landfill cover, with substances that will not biodegrade at all. Okay, so that is the main concern with microplastics.
Thank you very much. I'm going to jump in with another question and ask the two regulators we have on here, Siobhan and Gordon, are there emerging contaminants of concern on your provincial jurisdiction and radar for any additional management?
Well, I could start with that, and I guess the short answer for us is no, not formally anyway. We are not regulating biosolids on the basis of emerging contaminants, but certainly we're paying attention to the research information and the monitoring information that's coming forward from largely from other jurisdictions. But it's, we see PFAS issues becoming quite dominant in the U.S. and other emerging contaminants. So we're paying attention to that. I think one of the pieces of information we'd be looking for is an understanding of what levels in biosolids and ultimately what level in the receiving soil after the biosolids are applied that we would at which we would expect to see some adverse effects, and then that's something we could actually work back and start to deal with, putting some regulations in place around emerging contaminants.
Thank you.
I would echo from Manitoba's point of view would be similar. We don't currently have any regulatory limits for those, but we are paying attention to that. There will be an update of the Manitoba Water Quality Standards, Objectives, and Guidelines, and it's quite likely that there'll be a discussion of those types of issues that will be part of that, and then that will, as more information is known, will make its way into regulatory requirements.
Thank you. There's another question from the audience for Siobhan. Do the public have concerns because they are legitimately have no concerns, or because they aren't aware of what they are doing? Do you have a public outreach program to notify and educate residents?
Yes, so our licensing and approval process includes a public component. So for each project, so any municipality that wants to have a land application program requires a license. So as part of that review, we have a technical review through all the different government departments that have an interest in the project, and we advertise locally and collect comments from the public on that specific project. And all of the information is available on our website as well. So we have a public registry where people can go find the proposals, all the information that's there. So yeah, the answer to that would be yes, we do talk to the public there.
Thank you, Siobhan, and I can attest to that too as one of the practitioners in the industry here in Manitoba. We often have a very comprehensive public engagement program with the larger licenses such as the City of Winnipeg. We have other questions here. Sorry, my apologies. Next question is microplastics again and I believe, Benny, you may have touched on this already, but microplastics have adverse impact on terrestrial ecosystems. They can be ingested by worms, for example, and causing blockage. Has there been any demonstration of this toxicity identified in plant pathogens or plant uptake of these items?
As far as I know, plant uptake has been shown, and again, the research body is growing, and right, yeah, microplastics is going to be a big issue. And the Canadian government right now, the Trudeau government, is heavily investing in research, and this is um, one of the areas, environmental areas, that they're very heavily focusing on. So, I mean, I would not be surprised if we have more limits or bans. I mean, already Canada is doing very well. Like, we have the ban on single-time use plastics and things like that. But I wouldn't be surprised if things get a little bit more tougher in Canada.
Thank you very much. We're going to move to a couple questions on the regulations that were presented here. And this one is, I'm going to direct to Benoit. What are your thoughts specifically on the new fertilizer regulation and affecting the biosolid industry in your jurisdiction of Ontario?
So I guess currently under the nutrient management regulation, I guess the regulation already recognized that materials that are regulated by the Fertilizer Act and regulation are just as any other commercial fertilizer. So there's no need for a NASM plan. And I guess what we're saying is that, again, those fertilizers should be applied in accordance with their label, and following best management practices. I guess the handling, the storage is not is actually relying on best management practices, and so I guess, you know, if we're looking at the future of regulation in biosolid, I would say that, you know, the part of the future is in the hands of the people in the industry, and I guess the society, but also those people that are in the industry. So because in Ontario specifically, currently, the use of solid as a commercial fertilizer really rely on best management practices. I guess if there are bad apples in the industry, it may have an impact on everybody. So I think it's important to go back to basic principle, and the farming industry really promote these 4 R's, and maybe the biosolid industry should keep an eye on what's happening in that world, so to adapt. But also, like I said, it's the 4R principle, which is the use of the right product at the right time, at the right application, and I guess at the right source. So yeah, so I guess that's where I'm going to leave it.
That's great. Thank you very much. I really appreciate the 4R approach. That's the approach we take here often too with that. Jim, I'm going to move to you on my next question here for this, and looking at the commercial use of biosolids and fertilizer. You heard about our presentation from CFIA. How extensive are biosolids used as commercial fertilizers on your side of the fence line?
Yeah, that's a great question. They are used. It's most of the pathway by which most are used are through a permitted composting facility. So biosolids would be brought to a centralized composting facility where they would be mixed with city yard wastes and debris, mixed and then formulated into different types of product that are used for site reclamation projects, Colorado Department of Transportation projects, and then to some degree brought back into your Home Depots and your Lowe's and things like that, and sold as bagged products for residential use. Just recently, the region has also started to separate phosphorus from the biosolid streams, and that's become a really nice thing to have at these composting operations, because it actually allows them to really dial in and tailor the phosphorus content of the soil amendment based on the end use. So that's been a nice recent change here in the Denver metro area.
Excellent. Thank you very much. We're not having that many more questions show up. Robert, have you seen anything more show up in our question and answer period?
No, we're not. So we're getting close to 2:30. We don't have a really hard shutdown, but maybe if anybody had one last item to add or to wrap up, and then I can thank everyone.
So maybe we'll go around the table. Gordon, anything to add in?
No, I don't think so. I appreciate the opportunity to sit in on this session. It's been some really interesting presentations. Good to hear viewpoints from other jurisdictions.
Thank you. Siobhan, anything to add in?
No, again, thank you for the invitation to participate, and it was very interesting. Certainly, lots to be looking forward to in the future.
Thank you. Benoit, anything from your end?
Yeah, well, I can take the next half hour if we have time. But, no, well, I guess seriously. So what I'd like to say is that Ontario periodically review policies that relate to sewage biosolid and in other jurisdictions, just like my colleagues are doing. So we're tracking science related to emerging contaminant, and also we're involved in advancing the knowledge of biosolid from time to time in one way or another, either partnering with federal, provincial stakeholders and academic, and providing funding through that. So Ontario is doing a good share of that. And with respect to microplastic, I guess the Ministry of the Environment has done quite a bit of work, because I guess they're looking at on the drinking water policy side of things with the Great Lakes. They've done a lot of work on that. So. And I would like to point the audience here to some research that was done by Ryerson University in terms of looking at potential impact to crops and common soil and aquatic organisms. They did some studies, and I guess it came out through the CCME Biosolid Task Group. And really, what the research shows that there was no adverse effect on the crops or the common soil organism and the aquatic organism when the biosolid applied, under I guess specifically to Ontario regulation, it worked well. In Ontario, we're kind of limited to 22 dry tons per 5 years, and so it's quite restricted in terms of application rate. Something that I should also mention is that the nutrient management regulations supersede any bylaw that deals with the same subject matter. So that may prevent some ban. I guess municipalities can decide not to apply their biosolid to agricultural land, but they wouldn't be able to ban the application within their municipalities from other jurisdiction. But I guess to preserve this sustainable practice, it's important for regulation and best management practices to be followed and reviewed as the scientific knowledge expands. So it's important to stay on top of the emerging contaminants and do our due diligence on that point. And as a last point, I would just like to mention, I guess, the excellent work that the Water Environment Association of Ontario has done in the past few years. I would direct the audience to the WEO's website. You can find a video on biosolids and the naturally sustainable practice, which talks about the practice of sewage biosolid application, and it touched also on emerging contaminants. And just in the past year or so, they developed a grade 7 biosolid curriculum program that can be used by teachers as an example to explain the importance of understanding life cycle interaction in the environment, the sustainability, and the stewardship. So these documents are there, and last thing that the industry is doing, or WEO is doing, is having an annual Biosolid Awards to recognize the work that is being done by the industry. So anybody from Ontario that would like to put their nomination in, you have until I guess June 25th to do that. So I'll leave it to that.
Thank you. I'll go to Jim, and then Banu and Eva.
This was a great panel. I learned a ton, and I just have to say, despite the heightened attention to those emerging concerns, I love the underlying resolve that I heard today with regard to protecting the highest and best use of biosolids. So I really appreciate that.
Excellent point. Thank you. Anu and Eva.
Okay, so what I'm going to say is it's important to be proactive than reactive. The biosolids community were kind of reactive. As something happens, it's an issue, and then we all try to, come up with something like we all try to deal with it. But it's very important to be proactive. We can learn, from other countries, monitor the regulations. And it's important to protect land application, beneficial use. There is the true circular economy, but also to acknowledge that we need to do more to increase the biosolids quality to be able to continue that. Thank you.
Thank you. Eva, any comments?
Just really quickly, again, I would like to thank the organizers for giving us an opportunity to present. Apologies for my presentation being longer than permitted. What I did want to mention is that there is a number of new documents on the CFIA fertilizer website. I do encourage people to visit it. It contains all information regarding federal regulatory requirements per product. It has been recently revamped and as per the new regulations. So I definitely encourage people to do that. And just for all the other colleagues around the country and provincial colleagues, I think that it's great to have that kind of forum and a conversation between the federal and provincial levels. And I hope that we can collaborate even more closely, obviously with the ultimate goal of beneficial biosolid use. Thank you very much.
Robert, it's all yours.
Well, from what I understand, if any of us have trouble with biosolids, we can send them to Manitoba. No. And I'm sending an invoice to WEO in Ontario for their advertising today, Benoit. No, just kidding. We work very closely with WEO, and I want to thank WEO for their leadership. We work with Atlantic Canada, Western Canada, BC, Water and Wastewater Associations, as well as Réseau Environment in Quebec to form this national group. I want to thank Carew for your leadership on getting this Biosolids Committee going again and linking with those regional associations. Anyone listening today who wants to get more involved, this is the route. You can get involved with CWWA and our biosolids activities. So I welcome that. For those who missed my speech at the beginning because of audio problems, don't worry, this is all recorded and we will ship out the recording to everyone. You'll hear my opening praises, and you will also hear Eva's full presentation. So we had to cut it short for timing, but you will hear Eva's full presentation. So I thank her for that. So to wrap up, I want to thank Tetra Tech, our sponsor, not only for being a member and a sponsor for many years. They've been a sponsor of our live events, and I hope we have another live event soon in Niagara Falls in November. I thank Carew and the committee. I have to thank you, Darren. Really professional job moderating today. And to all the presenters, thank you very much. Yeah, really great discussion today. Of course, I can't do this without my team behind us. The real coordinator of this event is Cara Parisienne, who's our communications manager and supports the Biosolids Committee. Adrian Toth is on the background scene here as well. And then our tech team of Ben and Bernie today. But of course, the greatest praise goes to our audience. Thanks for tuning in today, and thanks for being part of this. We'll wrap this all up on World Water Day, March 22nd, and we'll see you then.